Bangladesh for the last many months has been witnessing attacks on Hindus, attempts to silence their voices and large-scale persecution of the minority community. Now let's tell you first about the Hindu population in Bangladesh. Hindus account for just about 7.95% of the total population in Bangladesh. A small number, and yet they are the second largest community. That's because Bangladesh has a massive Muslim population. About 91% of the population in the country is Muslim. This wasn't always the case. According to the official 1951 census for East Bengal, as it was called then, Hindus comprised of 22% of the population of the province. That went down to 15% in 1991 and then to just 8.5% in 2011. 11 years later, in the 2022 census, that number is at 7.95%. Many believe that the reason for the Hindu population decline in Bangladesh is because of what we're seeing right now, the persecution of this religion. And this has happened despite clear constitutional provisions that ensure freedom to practice one's religion. And that brings us to the question, is Bangladesh a secular nation? Bangladesh is an Islamic nation. Islam was made the state religion of Bangladesh only in 1988. It overturned the 1971 constitution, which had declared Bangladesh, much like India, as a secular state. But while Bangladesh is an Islamic nation, there are provisions. There's Article 41 in their constitution that recognizes other religions, that recognizes and gives citizens the right to practice their religion. Far from reality, though, which brings us to the next question. Have Hindus always been targeted in Bangladesh? The answer, unfortunately, is yes. Some of the worst anti-Hindu agitations took place during the late 1980s and the 1990s. For example, in November 1990, during the Babri movement in Ayodhya, ripples were felt in Bangladesh as well, as mobs set fire to Hindu temples in Chittagong and Dhaka, the same districts that are seeing the maximum attacks against Hindus even today. Let's tell you about some of the worst attacks on Hindus in Bangladesh and take you back to 1950, when a massacre took place on board a train. Referred to as the Anderson Bridge Massacre, attackers boarded a train from both ends along the bridge, singled out and killed most of the Hindus on board the train. The compartments were locked, the train was stopped, and Hindus' throats were slit, their bodies thrown into the river. 21 years later, in 1971, another massacre of Hindus took place in Dhaka, as Hindus living around the Ramna Kali temple were killed during the Indo-Pakistan War. Nearly 250 Hindus were killed and the temple set on fire in this horrifying incident. And what I'm talking about, these are just two of the many documented massacres that Hindus have been subjected to in the last many decades in Bangladesh. And shockingly, even in the 21st century, this is continuing. So why is it happening now? Why are Hindus being targeted now? On August 5th, the then Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina, fled from her country despite being in power for 15 years. It was a result of her facing protests over a proposed quota system by her government. Her escape to India plunged Bangladesh into a crisis, and 3 days later, Mohammad Yunus took over as the interim head of the government. Yunus is a renowned economist and civil society leader and was even awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006. The irony of it all, considering it's now under Yunus that Hindus are being persecuted in this manner. Hindus in Bangladesh are largely considered to be supporters of Sheikh Hasina's secular Awami League party, which is why the change of regime has translated to an unbridled reign of terror for Hindus. Let's tell you about the reactions that have come in, particularly how has India reacted to the violence. The Indian government has repeatedly called upon the Yunus government to crack down on the extremists who are targeting Hindus in Bangladesh. Most recently, over the arrest of an ISKCON monk. The Indian government issued this statement. I'm reading their statement now. We've noted with deep concern the arrest and denial of bail to Sri Chinmoy Krishnadas. This incident follows multiple attacks on Hindus and other minorities by extremist elements in Bangladesh. It's unfortunate that while the perpetrators of these incidents remain at large, charges should be pressed against a religious leader presenting legitimate demands through peaceful gatherings. We urge Bangladesh authorities to ensure the safety and security of Hindus and all minorities. So like India has spoken out, have other countries too? Has there been global concern? there have been very few statements, unfortunately, expressing concern over what's happening in Bangladesh. The United Nations back in August, soon after the transition of power, had condemned attacks on Hindus, but there's been no attempt to intervene and ensure the safety of Hindus.